The image is by documentary accuracy, but it is the aura of melancholy witness that marks them as the work of Seán Hillen. Now, that's worth analysing, because I don't think that Seamus Heaney was actually making some kind of a character reference to Seán, because anybody who knows Seán, he's very far from being a melancholy person. Seán is very effervescent and warm and a very sensitive human being. But I think what he's referring to here is that Seán has captured a moment that has passed now, and please God, we will never see those times again. When there was great sadness, when particularly the northern part of the country where Seán and I grew up was at war with itself. And really, when you look at some of these images, just what he has captured are just little nuggets, almost fossils from the past that we can look back at now and say, well, were things really like that? And there's two images inside that I'd love to draw your attention to, because not only does photography have the ability to help us see the past, but they also evoke memories. There's one of an old lady walking past a cinema, and the cinema has been burnt out and is looking quite derelict, but it reminds me of part of the humour of Derry. There's a story told of an old woman one day at the height of the Troubles, was carrying her shopping bags when suddenly there was a huge rumble. And she put her bags down and she turned to a couple of young lads and said, tell me, sons, was that a bomb or was it thunder? And the boys wanted to show off their knowledge. They said, oh, that was a bomb, missus. And it is said she picked up her bags and said, thanks be to God, because I'm terrified of thunder. And that kind of reminded me of that. But the photograph beside it is quite an iconic image. And I'm glad to see it here actually as a postcard as well. And it evoked a memory that I had forgotten about. It's of the soldier standing on the right of the image. And I was a witness to Bloody Sunday. And so you can imagine the anger in our community, particularly in Craigin, as we were growing up in the days after Bloody Sunday. And then later that year we had Operation Motorman, when there were more troops sent in to take down the no-go areas of West Belfast and Derry that were used in the Falklands War. And so our estates became quite militarised. And I remember one night the army came in to raid a house in our street, and they put a cordon around. And I would have been 16 at the time, and I would have been into throwing stones and so on, but I was captured inside, so I couldn't throw stones. But I remember standing, and there was a soldier who looked like this. It reminds me, for those who might remember the 6 o'clock news on the BBC, when we had the old black and white televisions, there was the Magic Roundabout. Does anyone remember the Magic Roundabout? And there was Demby, who had, was like a Chinese jack-in-the-box, who had a moustache just like this. And there was a soldier who, to my 16-year-old, looked quite old. He was probably in his mid-30s at the time. And like myself, he put on a bit of weight and so on. But I began to pick on the soldier. And I began to say things to him that were about diminishing his humanity. And I remember to my right there were 2 young teenage girls. And as I made my comments at the soldiers, they would laugh. And of course my ego was being boosted as I diminished this man in a British Army uniform. And then after about 10 minutes, one of the girls said, Jesus, he's crying. And I looked, and the tears were running down the soldier's face. And if he'd run at me, and if he'd hit me with a punch, I could have dealt with it. But the fact that I was a boy, and I had reduced a man to tears, I cannot describe the feeling. I went home feeling utterly disgusted with myself. But it didn't end there. About a week later, I was studying A-level art at the Strand Technical College, which was down in the valley towards the Foyle. And after my classes, I was making my way back up into the Craig, and I was going through Brook Park. and I had to pass a British Army signer. And as I passed it, and I was trying to get past as quickly as possible, from behind me I heard the English accent, "Hey mate." And to us we had this enormous resentment because it was a bit like South Africa, where you didn't go out without your pass. You always had to have identification because you were going to be stopped by the army. And I assumed that's what it was, and I turned around with resentment. And facing me was the soldier that I'd made cry. Because there he was, with the Zebedee moustache, as I called it. And he held my gaze for about 20 seconds. And I was now in his control. And I remember he smiled at me and he waved. And I never stopped to get to know him or to argue my point. I turned around and tried to get away from him as quickly as possible. But I never forgot that soldier, because I know what he was trying to communicate with me. It was simply, I understand your hatred towards me, but I want you to understand I don't want to be here. And I never forgot that soldier. And I can remember praying that he would survive and be returned safely to his family. And that's what I love about this exhibition, because I think that there are nuggets of humanity all through them. Little moments that capture these intense experiences that we had, which people in the South will never understand. Sometimes we felt abandoned. Sometimes we felt that the North was a million miles away. So it's just great that the National Library has actually acquired this, because it is a time that we remember. We remember with great sadness. Some memories we have of great joy. But there are moments that must never be forgotten. And thankfully, in the words of Phil Coulter's famous song, "The Town I Love So Well," his prayer is being answered now, and that is, we are now facing a bright brand new day. And so congratulations, Sean, to a wonderful exhibition. It took balls for some of the places you went to take photographs. And people have to understand that as well, because in some ways you were entering the lion's den. And you may not get that here, but it took balls for a young Catholic guy from your age to actually go into orange parades and to try and make himself feel comfortable enough where he could take photographs. But you've captured something very special, and it's a privilege, Sean, and thank you for your work, and thank you to the National Library for acquiring it.